Hello and welcome to the AI Ethics Now podcast. My name is Tom Ritchie and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Andrew Maynard. Hi Andrew,
It's great to be here, Tom.
how you doing?
I'm actually doing pretty well.
Good, good. I wonder, Andrew, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your current role and what brings you to this discussion around AI, please?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a professor at Arizona State University in Phoenix in the US, and my work for goodness me, the last couple of decades has focused on what I tend to call advanced technology transitions, which is pretty much how do we get from where we are at the moment to a future which is better than the present in the face of transformative technologies. And of course, artificial intelligence is one of those transformative technologies we're grappling with at the moment. So for the last few years, it has been front and center on my radar, both following progress of AI, really grappling with some of the transformational changes it's bringing about, not only in the near term, but also where it's going over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and thinking about how on earth we handle this as a national and global society.
Fantastic. It sounds like you're exactly the person we want to be speaking to. Thank you again for joining. I wonder though, with your experience and the work that you've been doing over the past few years, I wonder what do you see as being the most likely future developments in AI?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky one. So let me preface that by saying I've worked in many cutting edge technologies. And 20 years ago, I was at the leading edge of nanotechnology. And I would say in every previous technology, I've had a pretty good idea of how it's going to play out over the next sort of 10 plus years. Where we are at the moment with artificial intelligence is the first time in my career where my crystal ball isn't working. I have no idea where we're going to go. I can sort of sketch out sort of speculations, but I'm not sure I trust anything. And those speculations go from we're just in an AI bubble at the moment, which is going to burst. And in 5 years' time, everybody will be looking back, rolling their eyes and saying, AI, wasn't that a bit of a bust? On the other hand, and I think this is sort of closer to reality, we're going to see 2 or 3 additional waves of really quite profound breakthroughs in artificial intelligence that'll lead to a future where we are grappling with, at the very least, artificial agents, so AI systems that have some ability to make decisions and make changes in the world we live in without direct human intervention. So that I think is really plausible. I also think we could end up in a future where we have developed AI faster than we know what to do with it and how to handle it, and we'll just have a complete mess with incredibly powerful systems, disruptive systems, undermining a lot of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that you mentioned there will definitely chime with the students on the module. We've been discussing AI winters and looking actually at the history of AI, and even going further back with algorithm and automata as well, going almost as far back as ancient Greece and talking about Talos, the bronze giant, and kind of the links that there are between that. One of the key things that comes out of that, which we can pick up, but I find really interesting, is with so many innovations and breakthroughs, but particularly in relation to AI, if you look at previous AI winters, it's always been stymied by available technology. And you've seen that the technology doesn't necessarily live up to the hype when these things have been created in the past. And so I think you're right. It'll be really interesting to see, is this something that in 5 years we'll all be looking and going, we really took a hard left turn into AI when actually we didn't need to because it hasn't quite met our expectations. Or as you say, we will be sitting here going, wow, we're now living in an AI enabled future, and there are lots of challenges that come with that. I wonder then, with all of that in mind, you mentioned about in the future that we will have these very powerful systems and that we could potentially be in a slight mess in some ways. I wonder how you think we could prepare for this AI driven future that you have mentioned and also that you've been speculating on in your work as well.
Sure. Yeah. And this actually is a large part of my work, asking how we actually prepare for these types of futures. And it's not easy. So, one of the things I think is very clear wherever artificial intelligence is going, and you have to realize it's also part of a larger ecosystem of transformative technologies, and increasingly you can't sort of tease them apart. The ways we've thought about making decisions in the past, I don't think are going to carry on working. Whether that's looking at sort of very linear ways in which we understand cause and effect in the world around science and technology and how it impacts society, all the way through to policy decisions, all the way through to the types of things people need to know, what we're teaching them. And you might want to call it AI literacy, for want of a better word. Everything that we've thought is worthwhile teaching and doing in the past, I think is going to have to be revisited. But what that means, it's very, very hard to tell. If I was to speculate, I would say if we're really going to thrive in this AI future, we've got to have people that actually have the humility to realize that what they've been taught, what they know, may not be enough to make smart decisions, which means that they've actually got to be open to learning from others, listening to others across many different disciplines. And one area that I work in is looking at the power of transdisciplinarity. So if you're a scientist, actually paying attention to what artists are doing, what people in the humanities are doing, actually going out into society and listening to ordinary people and their concerns and their aspirations. It's the only way you can begin to understand how to take those steps towards the future you want. So actually learning those skills around listening and humility, understanding the social impacts and implications of emerging technology. So this is something that I think is very important. I've seen this in multiple waves of emerging technologies. There's a tendency for experts to say, this is so complicated that the only people that can make decisions are us. And you've absolutely seen this with artificial intelligence. I think it is absolutely fundamentally wrong. I think it's true that many people can't understand the intricacies of, say, a large language model and the fine tuning there and the sort of the granularity of the models. But pretty much everybody can understand the implications of what happens when you take a powerful technology that mimics human beings and puts it into society and it's let run wild. And I think we need to help people realize that everybody both has an ability to think about what the consequences of these disruptive technologies are, but we also need to make sure that we have a society where everybody has the potential of having a voice in crafting that future. Now, that's easy to say. Actually, how we get there is difficult because you need new structures within society. You need new ways of teaching. You need new jobs where people can actually do this. You need new mechanisms for people to be part of the process. And this requires research. It requires work. It requires building. And this is one of the tasks, I think, as a society we have in front of us. How do we build the systems that are going to enable us to thrive in an AI future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're touching on a lot of ideas around kind of democratization of technology and democratization of AI.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right that the inherent explainability is something that is quite challenging at the moment. And we spend quite a lot of time on the module talking about media representations of AI and how it seems like we're split between this dichotomy of we will live in this perfect AI-enabled utopia, or we will live in a world of superintelligence where we'll all be subservient to, the next Terminator robot, or whatever it is that you see on these different platforms. And I think your point about explainability is a really important one that perhaps we've misunderstood as part of this module and as part of the discussions we've had, where I know that previously I've spoken a lot about explainability of the AI systems themselves, of the LLMs, thinking about how do we crack open that black box of this technology. But I really like the way you're saying, okay, that is important and there is a place for that, but it's actually understanding the implications and the consequence of applying this technology to society. That's where the important discussions need to be had, and that's perhaps where that democratization can take place.
I think so. Can I just say something sort of in addition to that, which I think is really important? So there's been a lot of talk about transparency around AI and opening that AI black box, on the assumption that if we try hard enough, we'll actually be able to understand the decision-making processes that an AI goes through. I actually don't think that that's possible now, and I think it'll be even less likely in the future. And the reason I say that is even though an AI based in a machine is not like a human brain, really important distinction, there are some similarities in terms of the complexity of the system. And if you look at a human, if I look at you, I have no idea what's going on in your head. It's a bundle of neurons and synapses and chemicals and goodness knows what. The only way I could fully understand how you're thinking and how you're making decisions is to basically freeze your head, dissect it, sort of cut it into slices, put it into an incredibly powerful system and try and work out what each of those points are doing. But I'd have killed you in the process and I actually won't get anywhere. The bottom line is we do not understand what happens in people's heads. All we understand is the correlation between what we put into them, I'm speaking like this, and what comes out of those conversations. And I think that's where we're going to have to be with AI. We're going to have to realize we cannot dissect the box. We've got to treat it as if it's as complex as a human brain at some point, where the only way we can understand how it's thinking, inverted commas, or making decisions is to develop that understanding of how what goes into it affects what comes out of it.
Absolutely. And I think that it brings us very nicely onto the next question, which is going to be around some of the ethical considerations. And you've raised that point that we have again tried to speak a lot about, around thinking about who is programming these algorithms, and how we're ensuring that more voices are included. One of the things we've been speaking about a lot is that a lot of AI algorithms at the moment, particularly companies like Microsoft and others, they're very much focused on this kind of Western, perhaps Anglophonic model of people who tend to speak English. And that's where these very large models are being created. What that can mean for those perhaps in the global South and in other spaces like that is something to be considered, because not only do you have this challenge of perhaps Anglophonic models, but then you have the digital divide that's preceded that, where people's data isn't even being included in some of these algorithms to begin with. And so it almost becomes like a compounding negative, where you don't necessarily have access to these tools to be able to even engage with them in the first place, which means your voice then generally isn't included along with your data. And you can see how the challenge perpetuates for those who aren't perhaps part of that global north.
I think it's a really important set of questions, and actually, it's a really nice segue into asking about sort of what are the human centric decisions we make around AI. How do we actually develop AI systems? And you can frame it in terms of ethics. How do we develop ethical AI systems? But to me, more importantly, how do we develop AI systems which actually contribute to our humanity, enhance it wherever we are in the world, and whatever culture we're in, whatever situation we're in? I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the big models at the moment are developed with a very Western perspective. More than that, the way they're developed, the way that they're fine-tuned, inherently reflects a Western philosophy and a Western mindset. And it's subtle. You may not think that that's important, but say you're looking at a US developed model. I mean, look at OpenAI's ChatGPT. Embedded in there is a very US centric set of values in terms of what's important to the individual versus society, how people should think, what they should think about, what they should not think about, how they should think about different things. And as a result, as you're engaging with this LLM, it's subtly beginning to sort of push you in certain directions in terms of your thinking. Now, that framing is embedded in a very specific ideology. It's embedded in a very specific culture. It's embedded in a very specific worldview. If you were to see similar size LLMs being developed in other economies, you're either looking at sort of Eastern economies or global South economies, I think that the whole framing and the ethos and the worldview going into it would be different. And so this raises the question, is there a danger of homogenizing global society and imposing a very narrow sort of value and ethics set on global society, or is there an opportunity for diversity here? And this is even before we're getting to sort of some of the broader ethical issues around training. Should we be proactively encouraging a diversity of AI systems, almost like sort of AI cultures and AI personalities? And I would actually argue very strongly we should be. And even take the case of looking at what an AI might look like coming out of China, for instance, with a very different philosophy of life and culture. You can imagine that what's already being developed there will give you very different responses. It will guide you in very different ways. It will make decisions in very different ways. But then you get to also the question of access and training. So access is incredibly important. If you end up with a world where the haves have more and the have-nots have less, you're not only sort of entering sort of very big tension points within global society, but there are huge equity issues there as well. And then the question of where does the training data come from? I think there are a lot of complexities around access to training data and how it's used. I don't think it's as black and white as people sometimes make out. But absolutely, if you have models that are trained in a certain way, they're going to behave in a certain way.
Yeah, and that's a really important consideration, I think, that we're trying to get through with these podcasts, and as I say, with the module itself. What I found really interesting, Andrew, through the discussion is we've been moving between the role of the individual, the role of perhaps governments. We spoke a little bit about governance without perhaps going too much into it, and also the role of businesses themselves, thinking about Microsoft and Google and others who are creating these, and perhaps a need for this almost cultural AI. I love the way that you've mentioned that, and I had a great image in my head when you said it that really kind of resonated. But I wonder, with all of that in mind, are you able to speak a little bit on how you think individuals, businesses, and governments can actually work together to shape the future that you've been talking about?
Yes, I do. Again, it's complex and it depends on a lot of intentionality. So, for instance, what we're seeing at the moment is developers and businesses really taking the lead in what is developed, how it's developed, and how it's deployed, which means that as a society, we are crossing our fingers and hoping that they're doing the right things, that they are behaving ethically and responsibly. And we all know that in a for profit, no matter what your intentions, at the end of the day, money matters. And that is concerning. We're also obviously seeing sort of government sort of come in with regulations. So in Europe, obviously, you've got the new European regulations around AI, but I don't think we know yet what is going to be the greater force, the market-driven impetus on the company side or the regulatory frameworks. And I actually fear that the market driven impetus is going to be so great that we could end up in a future where all the major decisions are being made by for profits. And if that sounds like something that's scary as a democratic society, we've got to work out how to mobilize around that and ask the question, what do we want the AI future to be like? And as a group of people within a democratic society, how do we influence the decisions to ensure that it's a good future rather than a future that just sort of benefits the few? How we do that is really challenging. And this is something I grapple with. The thing that challenges me the most is just the speed at which the market drives things and the impetus there. And I'll give you an example of this. You look at OpenAI. So before ChatGPT came out, this was an organization that was committed to the public good in terms of developing autonomous general intelligence. But their focus was on public good, doing the right thing, doing the ethical thing, doing the responsible thing. And then with ChatGPT going public with the web portal, money started dangling in front of the company, and everything changed. That promise of massive profits and massive impact just changed everything. It was almost like it was an irresistible force where even the most ethical and responsible people in the industry just couldn't resist that force driving them to go as fast as possible and make as much as possible. And it worries me that that's going to flood everything. So then the question is, if that's a danger, how, again, as a democratic society, do we organize or put systems in place that either limit that or channel that in a more positive direction? And then the question is that at the level of regulation? I actually don't think it is in many cases. I think it's one mechanism. Is it in just changing expectations around AI? So consumers have a lot of power. Do we have a way of helping consumers begin to guide and direct the sort of AI implementations that they want to see and they do see? And of course, that means increasing AI literacy. Because if you make a decision on whether you use, say, ChatGPT or don't use it or how you use it, you've got to be informed in terms of what the consequences of your actions are. So there are many moving parts here, but I think we've got to think critically about if we want people within society to be a large part of the decision-making process, how do we give them the agency to do that and the mechanisms to do that, which I don't think exist at the moment.
No, and I tend to agree. And I think the role of the individual will be key in driving this because, as you say, the market driven aspect of businesses and the regulatory component of governments and the EU and other organizations. Yes, I really like your way of them on a seesaw almost in my head as you were talking. When you're speculating on that future, have we gone down this market driven route? Have we gone down the regulatory route? But having said that, the role of the individual within that is key. And I really like that you pulled that out. I wonder as well, you mentioned intentionality. I really like the word intentionality. And I think it's something that we lack far too much of in many things that we do in the world and how many things are designed. But having said that, I wonder, with that intentionality in mind and with what we've discussed, what would your vision for the future of AI be, given everything that we've mentioned? What would you say? What would you speculate?
So I'm going to give you two, possibly three visions. And I'm going to preface this by saying I have an incredible flaw. And my flaw is I'm a physicist, which means that I'm always really excited about different stuff. So I can sit here and imagining a future where you've got intelligent AI agents that are just creating havoc around the world. And as an academic and a physicist, I'm going to rub my hands and think that's really interesting. It's probably not what we want, but it still excites me. If I was to be more realistic and more responsible, though, I think about an AI future that I would certainly like to see, you have to think, first of all, about what is important to us as individuals and society. To me, looking at any sort of emerging technology, as soon as you start putting the technology first rather than people first and what's important to us, you've lost any sort of ability to have a reasoned argument about how to build that future. So you think about us. I start with the individual. I think about myself. What would I like my future to be like? I would like a future where I wake up each morning and I'm excited to be alive. I'm excited by the things I can do, whether that's actually going outside, going hiking, reading a book, enjoying myself, listening to music. I'm excited about the relationships I have. I'm excited about the family I have around me. So my future is all about connecting with the world around me and connecting with people. It's not about AI. But then the second question is, if that's the future I want, how does AI play into this? How can AI make that very human centric future better? And now you can sort of begin to think about a future where AI actually creates more wealth for everybody, not just the rich at the moment, but it basically reduces the barrier to be able to live the life anybody wants. You have a system where AI takes the heavy lifting away from infrastructure based decisions. How you get water, how you get electricity, how bureaucracy works. So it basically frees us up to be more human than we are sometimes. I can look to a future where if I want to do stuff or learn stuff, I can engage with AIs in a way that really excites me. It expands my understanding, it expands my insights, it expands my ability to embrace what it truly means to be human to me. So that to me is a really exciting AI future. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to build that future. But I would say if we all begin to think about what is important to us, what really brings us, it's a cliche, but what brings us joy? And then ask, how can we actually steer AI towards that future where we live a life that brings us joy?
I really love that. I really love that way of you're not putting the cart before the horse, which I think is a temptation with so many of these conversations of, well, we're going to think about how AI defines the future rather than, as you did, no, I'm going to define my future by what it means for me to be human and then see how AI can support with that. It's a slight difference, but it can completely change the way in which we think about that future. And again, the role of AI in that. So thank you for sharing. I tend to agree with you. I think if I was to pick, it would be to allow me to go out and go on lovely walks and be with friends and family and perhaps not work as much and be able to bring my value as a human to situations rather than having to sometimes not be my entire human self when doing different processes at work and other things like that.
And if I can just add something to that, because even though it may seem very simple or even simplistic, I don't think it is. So, take, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals. If we're to build the sort of future I've just described, there are some really big challenges in this world that have got to be addressed and somehow resolved, including the suite of things in the Sustainable Development Goals, including sort of the impacts of climate change. So now you can say, if we can develop AI systems that allow us to generate new knowledge, new insights on how to address really challenging problems, how to sort of find new ways that humans have never thought of addressing those. Now you're beginning to use AI to fix things or at least change things that are going to make it harder for us to live the lives we want to live.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's a really it's a useful way of thinking about that future and a useful way of thinking about ourselves in relation to it. And it brings me back to something that you said earlier, but I didn't comment on, which is the need for this kind of transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity in the context that we're speaking about it in. Whilst the rest of it is very important on ethics and bias, and of course we have to have those discussions, and we know that there are serious challenges around the climate impact of AI, at the core of that discussion needs to be, what does it mean to be human? And then how do we create an AI that reflects what we're hoping to become in future?
No, I couldn't agree more. And just to sort of flesh that out, if we start with what does it mean to be human and think about all the things that contribute to that, it's not just technology, it's not just engineering, it's absolutely not just science, even though those are part of it. It's understanding ourselves, it's understanding sort of how we make meaning in life, how we understand the importance of our relationship with others, what it means to be sort of a moral person, what different moral frameworks are like, what's ethical versus unethical, how does art fit into this? I mean, it broadens things out, and you begin to realize you cannot think about sort of creating a future which celebrates our humanity without bringing in every single discipline possible, and even bringing in areas of knowledge and understanding that just transcend current disciplines. And I would, can I add one more thing to that, because this is something that I've found profound working with my students. Working in a leading university, we tend to think about education and what we term formal intelligence as being important. The more educated you are, the more right you have to be part of these conversations. Absolute nonsense. I have found that some of the most stimulating ideas that I've had and stimulating conversations I've had have been with people that are on the fringes of society, that haven't had a formal education, and yet they have profound insights into how technology impacts them and the sort of future they want. And I think we've got to have space for everybody to be part of these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something we're trying to do at Warwick with the module, as we spoke about before we started to record. And it's something we hope we can share. We have to take the sum of what makes us human and actually really interrogate that and try to create space for it. Create a space for it all.
Yep.
I think it comes back to a key word that you mentioned of intentionality. And it's something I'm very keen on that word. I'm very, very keen on that word in all things we do. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a fascinating conversation, and it's been really interesting to get your perspectives on these things and to kind of consider the challenges that you've given to us in this conversation. So thank you so much, and thank you for joining the podcast.
This has been my absolute pleasure.